Awesome.
All right, hello and welcome to our presentation on container-based sanitation. So this presentation is titled Container-Based Sanitation Subscriber Study Demonstrates a Rapid, Low-Cost Path to Achieving Sanitation Coverage in Urban Haitian Communities. So I'm here with Jess Laporte and Froggi VanRiper, who are researchers from Soil. So Jess and Froggi, you can take it from here.
Awesome. Froggi, do you want to start us off?
Sure, why not? So I'm Froggi VanRiper, and my pronouns are they, them, or she, her. And I'll let Jess introduce herself.
Yeah, Jess Laporte, she, her pronouns, and I'm with Soil's research team.
Yes, so I'm presently unaffiliated, but conducted this research as an affiliate of Oregon State University. And we did this as a collaborative project with Soil and with the University of Oregon. And so today in our presentation, we're going to give you, Jess will give you a quick overview about Soil and Echo Lakai and what this container-based sanitation program looks like. And then we will we'll collectively cover why we did this study, what we were looking to find out, and then both share some of the key findings from the study, because it's pretty exciting.
Awesome. So Soil is a research and development organization that provides sanitation services in Haiti. They started in Cap-Haïtien in 2006 through public sanitation and have evolved into a sanitation service. And it's a full cycle sanitation program that provides a mobile container-based sanitation unit that is installed in customers' homes. Those customers pay a monthly fee and receive regular servicing. And then that waste is transferred to our treatment site, where it is treated and transformed into into compost for agricultural use.
So when we launched this study, it was a collaborative effort, and Soil was a big part of shaping the research questions. But we also wanted them to be interesting to the sanitation sector at large. So we tried to make them as generalized as possible. We wanted to know what it was about Echo Lakai's CBS service that motivated households to join up. And then what either stopped people from being able to maintain access, or what motivated them to end their subscriptions. And then we were looking at the arc of sanitation access over time by individual households. So we'll talk a little bit more at length about that as we move on. What did they use before, during, and after their subscription at a household level? And finally, the Haitian government had questions about behavior change, or what is traditionally called behavior change in the sanitation sector, which we're starting to try to reframe as the sanitation arc. So after using CBS, did these subscribers continue sustained use of improved sanitation? The study potential population that we could reach out to were 734 active subscribers of the Echo Lakai program, and almost 1,200 people who had at some point in the last 6 years opened and then subsequently ended a subscription. We managed to get in touch with 633 total households, and we sent individuals to those homes to interview the potential respondents. It was a structured interview with the household decision maker that included a bunch of quantifiable questions that gave us data on the households and their properties and all of that. And then a number of open-ended questions about their perceptions, their perspectives, and things that we could then make some value-based interpretations on.
Yeah, and like many things in our operations, with this research study, we did have a number of logistical changes and conducted a number of phone interviews in order to complete collecting data due to a very long gas shortage in the north of Haiti at the time. As Froggi was sharing, this was really a collaborative effort. And one thing I did want to mention is that, Echo Lakai, like many of the other sanitation services, and particularly the CBS services, we collect a lot of baseline data about each of our customers when they join the service. And so this study asked some of those questions and then asked the deeper questions. And one thing that we looked at was reasons for subscribing. And so the main was cost and resource savings. Again, this is likely something that people were alluding to in situations where they might be aware of or have installed some sort of more permanent infrastructure. But another thing to know is that in Haiti, you often, unless like free wells or a well on your property is available, you're paying for every bucket of water. So our dry toilet actually has like a real day-to-day noticeable difference for many households. In the second highest category, quality of life, one of the main themes that we aggregated into this category had to do with having access to a toilet in their home as like a main motivator for why, or a main reason why Ekalakai would improve their quality of life. And then the last category, health, cleanliness, and security. These were kind of more specific ways in which Ekalakai would having an Ekalakai toilet would directly impact their household situation. And something that's interesting to note is that in a number of these categories, customers also cited reasons related to their communities. For a few of the basic demographics of the study, we compared them to the urban Haitian population. And so we found that the average household size of Ekalakai subscribers was significantly higher than that of other urban Haitian households. This can be an indicator of both space constraint due to high household density, and it can also help us to understand a little bit about the economic constraints of these households with more household members per income source. Another element we were able to compare was access to grid electricity. In particular, Haiti, like many other lower infrastructure contexts, folks come up with all sorts of ways to have electric access, but our customers reported a much lower average of access to grid electricity. And this is something we also knew anecdotally from the geographics of the Cap-Haitian region. Despite being the second largest city in Haiti, we serve the urban and peri-urban, densely populated neighborhoods. Many of them are flood prone, and outside of the direct city center in the metropolitan area, most utilities haven't reached yet. And then this is kind of going back to what Froggi earlier around the sanitation arc. We looking at access to sanitation before entering Ekalakai. Our customers were more likely on average to rely on open defecation or non-household sanitation that could be shared, likely public, sometimes through school or work. And then they were less likely to have access to private sanitation. So this is really setting the stage for how Ekalakai opens access for households who hadn't been able to access private improved sanitation before. On to you, Froggi.
All right, so then we started to ask those questions about why former subscribers left the service. And keep in mind, like just said, this is a subscription-based service. There is a monthly cost. It is heavily subsidized. It comes to, I remember in 2019, the translation was approximately $2.50 a month US, something in that area.
$2.50 or to $3.50, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, it fluctuated a great deal that year. But as you can see, it's fairly nominal. That said, almost half of the former subscribers' driving reason for leaving the service was a financial constraint. So either they said it's too expensive, or more commonly, we can't afford it. And there was a big difference actually when we looked at those two responses. A lot more people said I can't afford it than said it's too expensive. And they sound like the same thing, but the first one, I can't afford it, recognizes that it is worth that it's worth the cost, but that the barrier is in the household's ability to pay. Whereas it costs too much might imply that they don't believe that the service is worth what it's being charged. The majority of everybody said can't afford it in this financial issues category. And this included anything from economic shocks, sudden economic shocks, to ongoing scarcity, to a range of different potential financial constraints, losing a job, things like that. Almost 30% of users were sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. They were either a little more economically secure, or they were in the process of climbing the economic ladder and used the Ecolokai toilet to bridge a gap. So either they were constructing a new home and used this as a form of sanitation until they finalized the construction of a permanent infrastructure, or in some cases, and this was a small subset of the population, but it could be a growing demographic that CBS reaches out to, were households that used the toilet to supplement their household sanitation. So they had a household member with limited mobility, or somebody who was ill, or just a larger family and wanted more toilets or more accessible toilets in the home. Finally, just under 20% of users cited some form of dissatisfaction with either the service, the product, or the technology as their driving reason for unsubscribing. And you saw the first half of this graph earlier when Jess was looking at the pre-Ecolokai sanitation situation at the household level. This is looking at the arc from before to after engaging with Ecolokai. And you'll see that while there was a very high rate of open defecation among potential subscribers, once they had access to CBS, that rate went below the national average. Likewise, the average number of subscribers who had access to private improved sanitation was very low and exceeded the national average by the time that they left the service. And so this really does show that not only is the Ecolokai program achieving the goal of quote unquote behavior change, enabling the population to maintain access to improved sanitation and to seek out improved sanitation. But we find that we could talk a lot about behavior change. We find this is not so much bringing the concept of improved sanitation to these households as bringing access to these households, and the low cost, the cost savings, the improved health, and therefore the reduced lifestyle costs of poor health enable households to then continue to move forward and climb the sanitation ladder after they have had a sustained period of using Ecolokai. Another interesting comparison here is who is interested potentially in coming back to Ecolokai. So we asked these former subscribers, would you want to subscribe again? And those who had access to some form of private improved sanitation were far less likely to say yes, whereas those practicing open defecation or relying on sanitation outside the home were more likely to say yes, they would want to subscribe again. And so obviously private improved sanitation is the goal, and Ecolokai is one form of that. Another one, and I absolutely love this graph because this looks completely different from what you would expect in a typical product or service. This is, do you want to use it again versus would you recommend it to somebody else? And as you can see across the board, users are highly willing to recommend it, including those who have no interest in returning to the service. And this says to us that they recognize the value that Ecolokai provided to the household during the time that they were subscribers, and that they can see that that value translates to a wide range of other contexts. Whether or not that is still the toilet they want in their home, they look back on that experience favorably and believe that it has value for their community. And also, if we look at the sanitation arc, across the x-axis here are the pre and post Echo Lakai sanitation situation of the household. Those who express some dissatisfaction tend to do so from a position of having improved sanitation now. Those who have no access to improved sanitation at the time of interview were unlikely to express any dissatisfaction in their memory of their Echo Lakai experience. And as you can see across the board, there's pretty high satisfaction, period. We did just, it's worth noting, our researchers were identified as affiliates of the University of Oregon and not of Soil. They carried no Soil messaging with them, and they were very careful to ensure that the respondents knew that these responses were not being communicated directly to Soil. And finally, we've got the post-Echo Lakai sanitation compared with their driving reason for unsubscribing. So you can see, as you would expect, those in the transitional category did not transition to open defecation. What is really interesting here, and that this graph doesn't show you, but our background data does, is that the majority of those in that central bar actually invested in some form of permanent sanitation before leaving Echo Lakai. And so for these households, for that 29% of the subscriber group, former subscriber group, they actually used Echo Lakai while constructing or saving money for a permanent sanitation solution that they wanted in their homes. And if we dig a little deeper into this and we look at those financial issues, we can advance the slide. That bar on the left, when somebody reported financial issues as their reason for leaving, we would interpret that as an involuntary departure. And among those involuntary departures, you see the vast majority of subscribers that reverted to open defecation fell in this category. And 80% of everybody who fell in this category lost access to private improved sanitation. And 1 out of 3 actually, had no toilet option besides Echo Lakai. So this is a sign that even though the subsidized rate is fairly nominal, it is still inaccessible to a large portion of the target population and a really, really important portion of the community.
Yeah, so thank you, Froggi, for running through all of that. In a lot of ways, this research confirmed some of our hypotheses. We had expected a lot of more difference between our current subscribers and our former subscribers. And at Echo Lakai, we were looking at customer retention. How can we address what we were assuming would be a lot of dissatisfactions that we could address? It was really important to learn a lot more about our customer sanitation journeys and the role that Echo Lakai can play. One kind of low-hanging fruit takeaway for us was the high interest among former subscribers to return. That was really important for us to understand and for us to think about how to take action steps to maintain relationships or contact with customers after they leave the service, and be available to them as a solution in the future. As Froggi has been really hitting home, CBS is affordable CBS would really enable vulnerable households to access and maintain safe sanitation. It brings the threshold of getting a toilet for your household so much closer financially. And that entry point is going to be really that entry point is kind of a turning point for a lot of these households. And CBS answers things that are beyond just finances. It also answers things like space constraints, being in these densely populated areas, maybe already having built your home without an inside sanitation option, and then your latrine being filled up. It actually addresses a lot more of the environment that these folks are living in, as well as being a financially accessible option. But in these findings, we are going to need to grapple with the reality that there are still many potential users that are unable to pay for a service, and thinking more creatively and more proactively about how to address that. And I think that this research really situates CBS as a key tool in citywide inclusive sanitation, as countries and as cities are approaching increasing sanitation access, container-based sanitation is really, it's a really long-term, though many people see it as short-term, it is a long-term solution. And it's very adaptable, it's very flexible, and it's ready for a lot of the environmental challenges that these contexts are facing. So that's what we have for you all, and we can go over to Q&A.
All right, thank you, Jess and Froggi. It was very interesting seeing like the social and economic dimensions of container-based sanitation in this context. And so everyone watching, you can please put more questions in our Q&A function throughout the text. But our first question is about how this research relates to other contexts. So how do your findings from this research with Echo Lakai compared to other container-based sanitation initiatives in different areas, for example, in rural Alaska?
So I am vaguely aware of some applications in rural Alaska. Obviously you're dealing with a fundamentally different climate and a slightly different user base. Economically speaking, the user base in rural Alaska, where you lack the infrastructure and you have the kind of remoteness that requires a non-grid solution, you don't have quite you don't have the density, which is one of the reasons that CBS is so important in an urban area like Cap Haitian, is the density of human excreta to be managed. So I actually can't tell you that I know of any systematic studies that have taken place in Alaska, but I do know that the urgency of this technology in Haiti is fundamentally different from a cold weather climate with a dispersed population in terms of the potential risk and the potential success of a traditional latrine, even though you do have the freeze thaw experience in Alaska.
Yeah, and I will add, just within our context in Haiti, many organizations, different folks, soil is, we treat some of the only waste that gets treated in Haiti. We treat almost all of it. And so we're often asked, oh, can you come to this region? Can you come to that region? And we have really honed in on the strength of container-based sanitation because it's a service model. And that container, when it fills up, is going to need to go to a centralized treatment facility. Proximity is really big on scaling this kind of a technology. So I think that that's something that we've come across. We know that even in our urban areas, Cap Haitian is mostly a low-lying floodplain, but as we have sought to start to service more of our mountainous customers, all of a sudden we're looking at, oh, our transportation assumptions aren't the same, and the user assumption, all those things. So we've really honed in on a specific geographic area, and we believe that geographic areas having similar factors are like a very good fit for this technology.
Yes, thank you. That gives a lot of information about how context plays into what you do. Mm-hmm. So our next question comes from Sarah Everhart. How can you better focus subsidies to allow more vulnerable populations to access this service?
That is exactly what we are. We are in the process of continuing to explore. At different times, there have been different price points for different payment methods, reducing the activities that our team needs to do to bring in the service fee. But we want to look more at and understand more and about payment behavior and how our expectations of customers for payments can mirror their reality more. Something that we found in this study, which again, we kind of knew anecdotally, but that the majority of our customers are relying on small business, micro business income, which is highly variable. And even if you put 3 or 4 or 5 of those together in a household, it doesn't give you the same payment, the same economic perspective or like planning that you would have from having even just one salaried position in a household. So really thinking about how to be adaptable in that way. Do you have anything you want to add, Froggi?
Yeah, actually something that's on the horizon, not that soon on the horizon, but somewhere out there that we're excited to look at are, well, there's two different things. One is a study specifically to address the way that different approaches to subsidy, including full subsidy with the communication, with a monthly communication about the value, as compared to just a free service. A lot of the sort of psychological underpinnings of recognizing the value of what you're receiving and how those interplay with retention and satisfaction and recognition of the value of the service. Mm-hmm. That's a study we're hoping to launch soon. On top of that, I'm aware that the government of Haiti, or Cap Haitian, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, has just started to open up the idea of a payment, what is it called? A results-based financing operation where, and this ties in a little bit to the citywide inclusive sanitation model in many ways, in the sense that the government is going to be recognizing this as one of the ways to provide sanitation to the community. And instead of just focusing municipal funds on infrastructure, on sewered and centralized infrastructure, focusing some of those funds on paying private service providers like Soil to achieve sanitation coverage in low infrastructure communities, where that can be an immediate outcome at a much lower cost. And in fact, we can credit this study with having ushered in that conversation, because it did give the confidence to the Haitian government that the subscriber base was satisfied with this, that it was meeting a lot of needs, and being met with a positive response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And if you are interested in diving more into this research, we will be posting, there are 3 journal articles that have came out of this research. So we'll be posting those on the feed loop so you can access those and learn more. And with that, we'll go to our last question, which is, thank you so much for your presentation. Has there been any research about specific qualities of container-based sanitation that would make it more or less desirable for this market? For example, too much work, afraid of the smell. What ways can you appeal to certain market segments?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the study methodology and how we conducted the interviews for motivations for leaving. And we also asked about advantages and disadvantages of the service. And for all of those questions, it was an open-ended question that our enumerators were trained in kind of categorizing those responses. And they made ample use of the comment or other option that we then had the joy of coding. But what was really interesting, and Froggi shared this, dissatisfaction was not a very high percentage of reasons for leaving the service. And we had gone through and combed through so many details around the technology of what potential, so we would have categories for the enumerators, and they even came up with some more after seeing the toilets. And then in the field, dissatisfaction was not front of mind, top of mind in discussing the service with our study team. And I think that is really telling. We had hoped to maybe get more feedback or an understanding of what parts of the toilet and toilet use were a challenge. But all in all, they were a relatively, anything technology based was even within that 19%, was a even smaller percentage of those complaints. Do you want to add, Froggi?
Yeah. From the other perspective, because from where Jess is sitting as a representative of Soil, they're looking into how to operationalize this, at a technology level. As a scholar, we're also looking at how to take this information and translate it at a conceptual and perception level. And that was where this really interesting sort of phenomenon emerged in the study with the whole auxiliary use, that whole category of users. Because one thing that you will run into on the regular, and we definitely did also ask these subscribers about their feelings about CBS as a long-term solution and about their aspirations for a household sanitation. And as you could probably expect, well over 90% aspired to a private water flushing toilet. And when asked why certain people didn't feel this is a long-term solution, a lot of them expressed it in those terms that, this is a technology that is for, people in need. We recognize it as a valuable technology for people in need, but I don't want to still be a person in need in the future. And a way to potentially decouple this from that concept of being a technology for the poor is to start focusing in on that market segment of people who can get a quick and easy auxiliary toilet for grandma, or you have a family member who's experiencing cholera right now and they don't have the ability to run down to the toilet every 5 minutes, or you have multiple family members and you'd just like another accessible toilet, or you have renters in part of your home and you'd like a toilet for the renters so that you have your own privacy. And this could do two things. One, it could, create the psychological decoupling, which would say this is a tool that affluent people are also availing themselves of. It's not something that brands me as a person in need, as a household in need. But the other thing it can do is it can bring in a portion of the subscriber base that has the financial security to not require the level of subsidy that a lot of the target users require. And it could in concert, hopefully, with some government-based financing as well, could help to modulate the reliability and security of income for a service provider. So I found that to be a really interesting takeaway from a scholarly perspective as well.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Froggi and Jess. That's all the time we have now, but we're really excited to look to see where this work with soil and where this research goes in the future. There is one more question that came in, and so we'd encourage you to maybe try and answer that in the FeedLoop platform. But that's all we have for now. I encourage you to join us in the Wash in Challenging Context session that is starting next.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
so much. Thanks.